So here's a question for you. Why does it feel like no matter how much money you make, it just slips through your fingers at the end of the month? I've been there too. I used to feel stuck, frustrated, and wondering why I couldn't get ahead financially. But everything changed when I discovered one simple habit that completely flipped the way I manage my money. And in this video, I'm going to break down exactly what that habit is, how it transformed my finances, and how you can use it to take control of your own financial future. Most people face the exact same challenge when it comes to money, and it's one of those issues that almost everyone can relate to. You work hard, you put in the hours, the paycheck finally hits your account, and then almost like magic, it starts disappearing. Rent goes out, bills are paid, maybe a couple of dinners, a few small purchases that you don't even remember making, and before you know it, you're right back at square one, waiting for the next paycheck to refill the account. It feels like an endless cycle where no matter how much you make, the result is the same, nothing left over. And the problem isn't that people aren't making money. Often the problem is that people have no real awareness of where their money is actually going. They think they know, but when they sit down and try to account for it, the numbers never seem to add up. It's frustrating, and it creates this constant sense of financial stress, like you're running in place without moving forward. The solution to this problem sounds almost too simple to make a difference. But it's exactly what broke me out of that paycheck-to-paycheck cycle. It's the habit of tracking every single expense, no matter how small. And when I say every expense, I mean everything from your rent or mortgage down to that $2 cup of coffee you grabbed on the way to work. The goal isn't to judge yourself for spending money, but to become aware of your habits. Because once you can see clearly where your money is going, it changes the way you think about spending. Think of it like turning on the lights in a messy room. When it's dark, you can stumble around and convince yourself it's not that bad. But once the lights come on, you can't ignore what's actually there. Tracking expenses does the same thing for your finances. It shines a light on your habits and forces you to face reality. I learned this lesson the hard way when I first started working. I thought I was being careful with my money. I didn't buy anything crazy. I didn't have expensive tastes, and I assumed that since I wasn't splurging on luxury items, I must be saving a decent amount. But every month, I was shocked at how little was left over. So I finally decided to write down everything I spent for 30 days, just as an experiment. And within that first month, I realized I had been lying to myself. I wasn't spending money on one huge thing, but it was the accumulation of all the little things. For example, I thought I only went out to eat once or twice a week, but when I tracked it, I discovered I was eating out nearly 5 times a week. I thought my coffee habit was harmless, but when I added it up, it was costing me over $100 a month. Even things like late fees or small app subscriptions I'd forgotten about were quietly draining my account without me realizing it. None of these things felt big on their own, but together, they explained exactly why I couldn't save anything. That one exercise completely opened my eyes. Just by writing things down, I became more intentional. The next time I was about to grab takeout, I paused and thought, do I really want to write this down later and see the number grow? That hesitation alone helped me cut back. It wasn't about restricting myself or feeling guilty. It was about making choices with my eyes wide open instead of blindly spending. Over time, that small habit grew into a system I still use today, and it became the foundation for building savings, investing, and eventually achieving financial freedom. The biggest challenge most people face with money isn't necessarily earning it, it's managing it in a way that actually leads to progress. You might get a raise, you might pick up extra hours, or even start a side hustle. But at the end of the month, it feels like nothing has really changed. That's because without a system in place, money slips away quietly. People often think budgeting is complicated or restrictive, so they avoid it altogether. They assume that as long as they're not overspending in a big, obvious way, they're fine. But here's the truth. Not having a simple way to track and plan your spending is like trying to drive with your eyes closed. You might get lucky for a while, but eventually you're going to crash into something. The problem is that money leaks happen in the small, everyday choices, and if you don't have a habit of checking them, you'll never know where the gaps are. The solution is the game. Change your habit that completely transformed the way I viewed my finances, writing down every expense, no matter how small. This doesn't mean you need a complicated budgeting spreadsheet or fancy financial software. The power is in the simplicity. You could use a notebook, the Notes app on your phone, or a free budgeting app. The method doesn't matter. The key is consistency. The act of writing down every expense forces you to be conscious of each decision. When you hand over your card for a $7 sandwich, you're not just spending money, you're also committing to record it later. That tiny pause creates awareness, and awareness is what leads to change. Once you start seeing the numbers add up in real time, you begin to connect your daily habits with your long-term financial goals. Instead of money feeling like it just disappears, you're suddenly in control. I learned this habit the first time I challenged myself to track every single purchase for a full 90 days. At first, it felt tedious. Every time I bought something, Whether it was groceries, gas, or even a snack, I had to stop and write it down. But by the second week, I noticed something interesting. I was spending less, not because I had forced myself to cut back, but because I didn't want to have to write it down. Suddenly, that quick soda from the vending machine didn't feel worth it, and that impulse Amazon order gave me pause. By the end of the first month, I could see patterns I had never noticed before. For example, I realized I was spending over $250 a month on little purchases that didn't add any real value to my life. That money could have been invested, saved, or used towards something meaningful. Seeing it in black and white hit harder than any financial advice I'd ever read. One specific moment stands out. I was looking at my expense sheet, and I noticed I had spent almost 60 zeros in 1 week just on takeout lunches. Before tracking, I would have sworn I was spending maybe 15 or 20, but there it was right in front of me, and I couldn't deny it. That realization completely shifted how I approached meals. I started prepping lunches at home a few times a week, not to deprive myself, but to break the cycle of mindless spending. Within 2 months, I had cut that expense in half, and the extra cash went straight into savings. It was the first time I felt like I had real control over my money, and it all started with this habit. That's why I call it the game changer. It's not glamorous, it's not complicated, but it forces you to face your financial reality in a way that nothing else can. Once you start doing it, you realize that money isn't just about making more, it's about managing what you already have with intention. One of the biggest problems when it comes to money is that most people live in a constant state of guessing. They believe they have a rough idea of where their money is going. They assume they're not overspending too much, and they trust that as long as they avoid big purchases, they're safe. But the reality is very different. Without true awareness, money habits often run on autopilot, and autopilot rarely leads to financial progress. The result is a cycle where paychecks come in, bills get paid, and everything else just evaporates without a clear sense of control. People tell themselves they'll start saving when they earn more or when things calm down, but those excuses pile up and years go by without any real change. The problem is not a lack of income, it's a lack of awareness and accountability. If you don't know exactly what's happening with your money, how can you expect to grow it or use it wisely? The solution lies in creating awareness through consistent tracking, because awareness is the foundation of control. Once you start tracking your expenses, you're no longer operating in the dark. You have clear visibility of where your money is flowing, and that visibility gives you the power to make informed choices. Suddenly, instead of wondering where your paycheck went, you know exactly how much went to food, how much went to entertainment, and how much went to random impulse purchases. That knowledge is empowering because it allows you to take responsibility for your choices and adjust them in real time. It's like stepping on a scale when you're trying to get healthy. You might not like the number you see at first, but it's the starting point that allows you to measure progress. Awareness doesn't magically solve financial problems overnight, but it is the spark that leads to intentional decisions. And those decisions are what create lasting change. I experienced this firsthand when I began keeping a record of my spending. At the start, it was uncomfortable because I had to face habits I didn't want to admit to myself. For example, I thought I was spending maybe $50 a month on subscriptions, but when I added them up, it was closer to $120 spread across platforms I barely used. That was money I had been losing every single month without realizing it. Another eye-opener was groceries. I believed I was smart with food spending because I avoided dining at expensive restaurants, but the numbers told a different story. I was going to the grocery store multiple times a week, buying things I didn't really need, and then wasting food when it spoiled. I had convinced myself I was being careful, but the evidence proved otherwise. Once I saw it clearly, I was able to make adjustments like consolidating shopping trips, meal planning more efficiently, and canceling unused subscriptions. None of these changes felt dramatic, but they added up quickly. Within just a couple of months, I had freed up an extra few $100s that could go towards savings or investing. One specific example that really stuck with me was when I discovered I had spent nearly $300 in 1 month on miscellaneous purchases. That category included coffee runs, random apps, a few clothing items I didn't need, and little impulse buys at checkout counters. Before tracking, I never would have believed I was spending that much on things that had no real impact on my happiness or goals. But seeing that number in writing was like a wake-up call. It made me realize that my financial stress wasn't coming from lack of income. It was coming from lack of awareness. The moment I identified the leaks, I could plug them. That one insight created an immediate shift in how I approached spending. The simple act of tracking built the awareness I had been missing, and with that awareness came control. That's why this habit works so well. It's not about cutting out all enjoyment or living in restriction. It's about being conscious of your choices. Awareness is the key that unlocks control, and control is what allows you to move from feeling stuck to actually making progress. By tracking every expense, you're building a foundation where financial growth becomes possible because you finally know the truth about your money. The problem many people run into with money is that they don't realize how powerful small habits are over time. They often think that financial success comes from one big event, like landing a huge paycheck, getting an inheritance, or winning the lottery. Because of that belief, they overlook the everyday decisions that are quietly shaping their financial future. The danger is that small expenses don't feel like a problem in the moment. Spending $5,000 here or 10 there seems harmless. But when those small, repeated actions add up month after month, they can create a massive drag on your ability to save, invest, and build wealth. This is what I call the silent leak in personal finances. People don't feel the weight of it immediately, so they underestimate its impact. Then years later, they look back and wonder why they haven't made progress despite working hard and earning money. The problem isn't laziness or lack of ambition. It's underestimating the cumulative effect of everyday financial habits. The solution is to bring those habits out in the open by tracking and examining them closely. The moment you begin writing down every purchase, you start to notice patterns that were previously invisible. That coffee run isn't just $4, it's $120 a month if you do it daily. That subscription you forgot to cancel isn't just the 15, it's $180 a year of money being wasted on something you don't use. Suddenly, you're not just looking at isolated expenses, you're looking at trends over time. Once those trends are clear, you can decide which ones are worth keeping and which ones are silently draining your wealth. This doesn't mean you have to cut out every small pleasure, but it does mean being intentional. When you see the real cost of a habit across weeks, months, or years, you start making smarter choices automatically. That awareness transforms how you handle money because you can finally connect today's small decisions with tomorrow's financial outcome. I experienced this transformation when I started tracking what I considered minor expenses. One of the most shocking examples was my lunch routine. At the time, I didn't think much about grabbing takeout at work because it was only about 8,000 Tommy 10 in each time. In my head, that wasn't a big deal. But when I tracked it for a month, I discovered I was spending close to $200 just on lunches. Over a year, that was nearly $2,400. Money that could have gone into savings, investments, or even a vacation. The reality hit me hard because I realized I wasn't consciously choosing to spend that money. I had fallen into a pattern of convenience without realizing how much it was costing me in the long run. Once I saw the numbers, I made a simple change. I started bringing lunch from home 3 times a week and allowed myself takeout only twice. That small adjustment saved me over $100 a month, which I redirected into a savings account. Within a year, I had built up an emergency fund that made me feel secure for the first time in my life. Another example came from entertainment expenses. I thought I was being reasonable by going out on weekends and catching a movie or dinner with friends. But after a few months of tracking, I realized entertainment was taking up almost 20% of my monthly budget. Again, it wasn't about cutting it all out, but I made conscious adjustments. Instead of dinner and a movie every week, I swapped one of those nights for a cheaper activity like cooking at home with friends or streaming a movie. The difference in cost was huge, but I still enjoyed the same social benefits. That one habit shift freed up enough money to start making consistent investments, which grew into something much bigger over time. The lesson from these examples is clear the small, unnoticed habits are often the biggest obstacles to financial progress. By tracking them, you expose the leaks that are holding you back. And once you make adjustments, even minor ones, the ripple effect is enormous. Suddenly, money that was disappearing into habits you didn't even think about is being redirected into building your future. That's the power of this habit. It turns the invisible into the visible, and the visible into action that actually moves you forward. One of the biggest problems with money that almost nobody talks about is how easy it is to ignore small leaks because they don't feel urgent in the moment. When people think of financial struggles, they often imagine major setbacks like job loss, medical bills, or debt piling up. But in reality, the most common reason people fail to get ahead is because of the quiet, repeated spending habits that drain their accounts without them realizing it. These leaks usually don't happen in one big, obvious purchase. They happen in dozens of small, everyday decisions that fly under the radar. The problem is that when you don't track your money, those leaks remain invisible. You convince yourself you're not spending that much, but when the month ends, you're left wondering why nothing is left over. This constant feeling of, where did all my money go, is frustrating, and it creates a cycle where financial goals never seem to get any closer. It's not about not making enough, it's about letting hidden habits sabotage your progress. The solution lies in shining a spotlight on these leaks and making them impossible to ignore. That's where the habit of tracking every single expense comes in. By writing everything down, you create a mirror that reflects your true financial behavior, not just the version you imagine in your head. Once you see the numbers clearly, the leaks become obvious and you can take steps to patch them up. What makes this solution so effective is that it doesn't require you to overhaul your entire lifestyle overnight. You don't need to suddenly stop spending money or deprive yourself. Instead, it allows you to make small, targeted changes that add up to big results. Maybe it's canceling 2 unused subscriptions, bringing lunch from home a few more days a week, or resisting the urge to buy every new gadget the moment it's released. Each small adjustment closes a leak, and when enough leaks are closed, your financial picture changes dramatically. The habit is simple, but the effect is profound because it gives you control where you once felt powerless. I can give you a clear example from my own life. When I first started tracking my expenses, one category that shocked me was transportation. I assumed my car costs were just gas and insurance, which felt manageable. But after tracking for a few months, I realized I was spending way more than I thought on parking fees, tolls, and maintenance I hadn't budgeted for. On top of that, I was using rideshare apps far more often than I realized, especially on weekends when I didn't want to deal with parking downtown. When I added it all up, I was shocked to see I was spending nearly $400 a month just on transportation. That number floored me because it was almost as much as my rent at the time. Without tracking, I never would have seen it, and I would have kept telling myself transportation wasn't a big deal. Once I saw the reality, I made immediate changes. I started carpooling with friends, I became more mindful about where I parked to avoid unnecessary fees, and I cut down on rideshare by planning better. Within 2 months, I reduced that expense by almost half, and the savings went straight into an investment account. Another powerful example came from entertainment spending. Like most people, I wanted to relax and have fun on weekends, so I didn't think much about grabbing dinner with friends or going out for drinks. But once I tracked it, I realized those nights were costing me anywhere from $60 to $100 each week. Over a month, that was close to $400, money I wasn't accounting for at all. By simply becoming aware of that, I started being intentional. Instead of going out every single weekend, I alternated between nights out and cheaper alternatives like hosting at home or finding free events. The difference wasn't about cutting fun out of my life. It was about balancing it with my bigger goals. That one tweak saved me thousands of dollars over the course of a year, and I didn't feel like I was missing out. The leaks were always there, but I couldn't see them until I made the choice to track. This is why the habit is so powerful. It transforms vague frustration into clear action steps. You stop wondering where your money is going and start directing it with purpose. The leaks that once held you back become opportunities to redirect cash flow into savings, investments, or paying down debt. By patching these holes, you create momentum toward financial freedom in a way that feels achievable and sustainable, not overwhelming. And it all starts with the discipline of tracking every expense, because only when you see the truth can you change it. One of the main problems people face when it comes to money is that they feel overwhelmed by the idea of change. They know they should save more. They know they should budget better, and they know they need to build good financial habits, but the thought of restructuring their entire lifestyle feels impossible. Because of that, they delay starting. They tell themselves they'll get serious about money when things settle down or when they start earning more. The issue with this mindset is that waiting for the perfect moment means that moment never comes. Life is always busy, expenses are always there, and income rarely feels like enough. The real problem is not that people don't know they should improve their finances. It's that they don't know where to start, so they don't start at all. This inaction keeps them stuck in the same cycle month after month, hoping for change but never taking the first step. The solution is to make it as simple as possible to begin. Instead of overcomplicating things with fancy budgeting systems or financial jargon, the easiest way to build momentum is to just start tracking every expense with the tools you already have. You don't need expensive software or a complicated spreadsheet. All you need is a notebook, an app on your phone, or even a simple note document where you record each purchase. The act of writing it down is what matters. It creates awareness and accountability without demanding a complete life overhaul. This approach works because it lowers the barrier to entry. Anyone can write down what they spent today, and once you start, the habit grows naturally. Over time, the simple process of recording expenses builds into a routine that changes the way you view money. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, you feel in control because you've taken the first small step. That one action opens the door to bigger changes like saving, investing, and planning for the future. But it all begins with something so simple it's hard to make excuses not to do it. I saw this firsthand when I worked with a friend who constantly complained about being broke even though he had a decent salary. He felt hopeless, like no matter what he did, he'd never get ahead. When I suggested he track his spending, he resisted at first, saying it was too much work. So I challenged him to do it for just 1 week. He agreed, thinking it wouldn't matter much. But by the end of that week, he was shocked at what he discovered. He had spent over $150 on random convenience purchases, fast food snacks, and online shopping that he hadn't even remembered making. For the first time, he saw in writing the habits that were keeping him stuck. That awareness alone was enough to motivate him to keep tracking. Within a month, he cut those random expenses in half without feeling deprived, simply because he didn't want to see the numbers climb on his list. By the end of 3 months, he had saved over $6,500, which he used to start building an emergency fund. What had once felt overwhelming and impossible became manageable just because he started small with a notebook and a pen. I had a similar experience myself when I first built this habit. I used to believe I needed to wait until I was making more money before I could save or invest. But once I began tracking my expenses, I realized I already had opportunities to save with the income I had. I just hadn't noticed them. For example, I found I was spending nearly $1 a month on late fees because I wasn't paying bills on time. That was money I was literally throwing away. As soon as I became aware of it, I set reminders and automated payments, and instantly I had an extra $80 a month freed up. That was money I redirected into savings, and it made me realize how powerful awareness alone can be. Without tracking, I would have continued wasting money on something completely avoidable. With tracking, I turned that waste into progress. The key lesson here is that you don't have to overhaul your entire financial life overnight to make a difference. The most important step is simply to begin with something small and sustainable. Tracking your expenses is that step. It creates the awareness and momentum that leads to real change. Once you've started, you'll naturally begin to make better choices, not because someone told you to, but because you can clearly see the impact of your habits. That clarity is what breaks the cycle of inaction and puts you on the path to financial freedom. So to quickly recap, most people don't even realize how much money slips away because they're not tracking it. But by writing down every expense, no matter how small, you build awareness, close financial leaks, and create the momentum to save, invest, and finally get ahead. It's simple, but it changes everything. If you found this helpful, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and drop a comment letting me know what money habit has made the biggest difference in your life. And if you want to take this even further, my next video is all about how to turn those savings into actual investments that grow over time. So stick around for that.